Greetings and welcome to this edition of Faith to Live By. I'm Pam Christian, your host of this weekly podcast, where each week I seek to help us explore current events from a biblical and prophetic perspective. For the past couple of weeks, we've been exploring how governments of the world are imposing various restrictions on their citizens for all types of basic living activities, including employment, shopping, and travel. My guest again today is Twila Brase, helping us understand how the Real ID Act in the United States runs a parallel with the restrictions many other nations are imposing on their citizens, and how all such requirements are efforts to extinguish any and all personal freedoms and liberties, to enslave the people of the world under a single totalitarian oligarchy. Not sure if what I just said is true? Then sticking around to listen to this entire podcast is even more important for you to make certain you are not deceived. No one wants to be deceived, yet, as I've often said, unless we intentionally examine what we believe and why we believe as we do, we can easily be deceived and not realize we are. After all, it is the very nature of deception that the victim is unaware. I know my audience is well informed and able to recognize such restrictions as the Real ID Act have been systematically implemented to incrementally bring all the people of the world under the control of a one world government. This is all part of the long-term goals that the self-anointed oligarchs have been working for decades upon decades to enslave the people of the world under what they call the Great Reset, to establish their multinational entity for a one-world government. If you don't believe that there has been such a group effort to extinguish your personal, God-given freedoms, then you are among those who have been utterly deceived by their highly orchestrated manipulation tactics. If you still trust your government, regardless of what nation you reside, you have become prey to their agenda. Mel K was my guest not too long ago, who perhaps more succinctly than most is able to articulate the reality of the world's condition with the explanation of how we got to the point we are, which is exceedingly dangerously close to being conquered by evil. Evil working through power-hungry and greedy men and women who believe they are in a position to act as God over all humanity. Mel K wrote in her book, titled Americans Anonymous, Restoring Power to the People, One Citizen at a Time, quote, "We are in the battle of our lifetime, and possibly an epic battle unlike anything we have seen in the past. With the specter of global totalitarianism looming, not one nation or principality, but the entire world is at stake. As I say all the time, they are not after the United States. They are after conquering and capturing the world, and the United States is in the way. Once they defeat and destroy our nation from within and from without, they can easily take the rest of the world. That is why we must stand in our power, remain firm in our commitment to truth, be fearless and brave, refuse to comply, and neither capitulate nor allow one more inch of infringement on our sovereignty or freedom." End quote. The time for us to stand strong against the evils in this world is now more than ever. As God has prophetically promised, He has been exposing all manner of evil wherever it exists, so His children, that is, all Christ believers worldwide, can unite in prayer, using our spiritual weapons of warfare to defeat the enemy. There is no power and authority the enemy fears more than that of Christ at work in and through His people. As God's people in this world have become more aware of the extent of evil, we are uniting in our assignment to call and tear down evil. The enemy's plans have been being torn down over the past 5 years, and knowing they are very close to losing every goal they have ever worked for over the past 100 years, the enemy is using what limited abilities he has left to work all manner of havoc all over the world, all at the same time. Hearing reports this past week of what is going on in all of the countries of the world at the very same time is in the natural entirely overwhelming. This is why we must remain engaged in our spiritual reality, so we will indeed realize the victory over evil Christ has already died to provide us. God's promises are certain, and we must remain focused to get us through what is certain to be the most turbulent times the world has ever seen, now and going through into early next year. This very real spiritual war between good and evil is the very reason I started this podcast in July of 2020 to help all of us learn the truth, to no longer be deceived, and fight for our God-given rights, not just for those here in the United States, but for all the people of the world. There is one being that has always sought to overthrow God and assume control over all humanity, and that being is known as Satan. Even if you have not yet come to believe in God and Satan, who are the entities behind all good and evil in this world, the existence for which is best described according to the Christian faith, in contrast to all other world religions and philosophies. But even if you haven't come to believe that, you must admit, at the very least, all human beings have been subject to a global battle of good versus evil. Our choice, then, is to decide which side of the battle we want to be aligned with, good or bad. There is no middle ground. If you are not intentionally aligned with all that is good, by default, you are aligned with all that is evil. If you are not willing to put the effort in to fight against evil for the promotion of all that is good, then you are the same as an intentional enemy against good. In the words of Melke, quote, "The totalitarian blog behind the Great Reset and the public-private partnership stakeholders, along with their United Nations and World Economic Forum tentacles and the international banking cartel, have invested everything in their Agenda 2030 and their 17 Sustainable Development Goals of total power, control, surveillance, and slavery system, will not be defeated without our full commitment to our freedom and future against them." End quote. Being armed with truth is our first order of business, and this is exactly what I seek to help us become each and every week with this podcast. Because our best opportunity for victory over these tyrannical oligarchs is to have the vast majority of people of the world armed with truth, I suggest your role to this end is to share this podcast with as many people as you can, far and wide. Citizens of America need to hear today's podcast about the Real ID Act and learn what we must do to resist it. Similarly, citizens of all other nations need to hear this podcast and consider it in light of the many restrictions and requirements imposed on them by their governments. Because of the significant advancement of evil in our day, all of us must become intentional about our existence, our alignments and affiliations, and much more fully and properly aware of the impact sinister forces are having upon us, our lives, our families, our societies, our culture, values, and ethics, and we must be willfully engaged in the fight against evil. We must take responsibility for the fact that evil has advanced to the state it has because too many of us have been apathetic and complacent and generally disengaged in society, abdicating our civic responsibilities to others who do not have our best interest at heart. The Real ID Act, in part, impacts our ability for air travel. Something I certainly don't want to be a problem for us who plan on being part of my Christian ground tour of Greece in April 2026. And if you've been thinking about being part of this trip, I want to be sure you know how to get your name on the reservation list. We want to get a group of about 30 people signed up because this size group is best for this type tour. And the more people who sign up, the less the trip costs each one of us. Some who have previously signed up have had to let me know that their plans have changed, which means we have more spots available now, which we want to fill up. At this point, it's just a matter of putting your name on the reservation list with your final confirmation in the next month or so. I'll explain more about this process of placing your name on the reservation list later in the podcast. But now, let me share my interview with Twila Brase on the truth about the existence of the Real ID Act to help you know what you must do to protect yourself and your loved ones. I want to move now on to how this whole HIPAA awareness allowed you to become aware of the deception with what's known as the Real ID in the United States. Okay, let's talk about that now.
Yeah, so I think Real ID is in the news because the government is saying you can't fly without it, that sort of thing. That's a lie. Just, I'll just start out right here. You can't fly is a lie. But I think the history of it is beneficial for people to understand and why we are where we are now, because this law for the Real ID passed in 2005. It passed through the U.S. Senate without a single hearing. It was just tacked onto a must-have defense spending bill, and they never had a hearing. They never had a vote. They had nothing. It just appeared for the final vote on the defense spending bill. So it was put in there without proper vetting and without proper time for the American public to even understand what was happening. So that too was a bit of a deception. And what the law says is it's essentially telling the states that they need to change their driver's licensing system to now create a federal ID. So the Real ID is not a state driver's license. It's not a state ID. It's not a state ID that simply, or a state driver's license that simply has a star on it. It is a federal ID, a federal identification card for a national surveillance system. Well, when the states figured this out in 2007, 2008, and 2009, they passed bills. A lot of states passed bills saying, we are not going to do this because this violates our rights. This is an unfunded mandate. It's going to be extraordinarily expensive, and it violates privacy rights because it's becoming a federal ID. And it's not just for flying. So you have to understand what the law says. The law says that that under the definition section, there's a definition of official purposes. And so this is the official purposes for the Real ID. And so it says that the official purposes for the Real ID are for access to federal facilities, access to nuclear facilities, access to commercial flight. And then it adds these words, and for any other purposes that the Secretary shall determine. So this is not limited to flight or federal buildings and nuclear facilities. Nope. The Secretary, all by him or herself, without going back to Congress or back to the president, could decide things like, well, you need a Real ID to buy a gun. You need a Real ID to access medical care. You need a Real ID to get married, to go to college, to rent a car, to rent a hotel room, to open a bank account. This is what's happening with national IDs around the globe. These are the kind of things that they cannot do without their national ID. What's being created here is not only a federal ID, but a national ID. And this, of course, we are a country of 50 states who limited the federal government into what they could do and put that into the Constitution. And all the other rights in the 10th Amendment, it says all the other rights are accorded to the states and to the individuals. Well, this is the federal government commandeering the states, getting them to pass laws to say, we will conform with Real ID. We will do whatever the federal government wants us to do. We will print federal ID cards. We will agree to not call them federal IDs. We will still have them look like a state ID. Essentially, the federal government hijacked the DMVs, and the DMVs played along with it. And so now the American public thinks that what they have are state driver's licenses with a star. So, in 2007, 2008, 2009, all these states, said no, and Real ID got stuck. And it got stuck for about 9 years. And then President Obama, at the end of 2015, shouted from the rooftops that you will not be able to fly in 2016 if you don't have a Real ID. Well, this was the first time that the major media probably even knew this. Anyway, they picked up on it. They heralded it everywhere. And now you had constituents of state legislators contacting them and saying, fix this. I have summer homes. I have winter homes. I've got children. I've got grandchildren. I got places to go. I've got vacations to take. I need to fly. So everybody just believed President Obama, and state legislators 9 years later, they just gave up. They gave up states' rights. They gave up individual rights. They gave up privacy rights. They didn't stand up like the legislators in 2007, 2008, and 2009. And so now here we are. So that was 2016, where 2016, 2017, and 2018, states all moved to conform with the federal government. They bowed to their constituents without telling their constituents that they were giving up their constitutional rights. And so now you have all the states who have agreed to conform with the Real ID Act, agreed to issue federal IDs under federal control. But COVID interrupted that a bit. They essentially pushed back deadlines. There's been probably about 6 or 7 deadlines in total because people were just not getting the Real ID, and legislators were saying no to the Real ID, and states weren't ready to issue Real IDs, and they didn't have enough money for the new equipment. Thing after thing after thing caused delay. So now here is where we are. They said that on May 7th of this year was the deadline to have a Real ID or you wouldn't be able to fly. And that has always been a lie. So first and foremost, the TSA has 16 different identification cards that you can use to fly. Or maybe even before that, what you need to know is there's no law anywhere that says you need any kind of ID to fly. This is just something the FAA came up with, but it's not backed by a law. The FAA is a regulatory agency. It's not legislators. There's no law requiring you to have an ID. But everybody has, followed this. But above and beyond that, now we have this law that says you need a Real ID for flight. And I don't actually even think that the law has said, or any Real ID compatible other ID. But the TSA has chosen to have 16 different IDs. And of course, your passport will always work for flight because it's going to work for flight over the globe. So it's always been a lie, and it's a lie that is meant to convince you to go and give up your constitutional rights and get this federal ID. Now, your listeners are probably thinking, well, so what? It's a card with a star. What, what's the big idea? Well, is this really worth fighting over? The DMVs testified to Congress December 5th, 2023, of their plans to digitize the ID, put it on our phones, and have remote access, real-time remote access to our phones. Now, just imagine if they think you've done something wrong and they just turn it off. Turn it off. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? How are you going to buy anything? Right? So what we're really looking at here is the creation of a foundation for the American version of the Chinese social credit system.
Right, exactly.
And
right.
so that this ID becomes a digital tracker, a digital controller. It'll control whether you get access, whether it'll monitor every transaction that you have. A digital ID pings the government, the DMV, every time you use it. They'll know where you're at. They might know what you're buying. It depends on, what comes back at them. But it can be, what is that word when you triangulate, right? You can triangulate, and who else is standing next to you? Who are you talking to? And they use their card too. So the two of you are going to a concert together. The two of you just bought fishing equipment. Whatever it is, they can have that information. So this is really, and then it's biometrically controlled. I didn't even mention that. So the federal law and the rule require a biometric starting with your face. And you should be incensed about this. This is a Fourth Amendment violation because what they have done is they have claimed a right to collect and catalog the coordinates of your body for their control. They are going to make your body your identifier, something that can never be changed, but something that can be faked and hacked and used to digitally impersonate you. But you, unlike a social security number, you can't change your body parts. You can't change your face. You can't change your thumb. You can't change your palm. You can't change your gait. You can't change your eyes, except by, like major surgery, right? This is a complete violation. The government has claimed this, and they're hoping we just don't notice. And so many people don't notice because they're going to the airport. And when the TSA at the checkpoint says, stand in front of that, give me your ID and stand in front of that camera, they're just doing it. They don't realize, I believe this is what's happening. They're not only being desensitized to let the government claim their body as their identifier. They're also, I believe that this is training their machines, their artificial intelligence machines. So when you hand them the ID, which you took the picture and who knows what clothes looking, who knows how that day, right? Now they've got a new picture of you. Now they've got new hair shadows on men. They've got you in a hat. They've got you in this. They've got you in that. And they say that they're getting rid of the picture, right? But are they getting rid of the data? Are they getting rid of the digital, bytes that are coming in about different pieces of you? I think they're training the machines to be able to see you better in a crowd than just, using your the picture on your ID. So you have to understand this is so big. This is so big. It should not be coming out of the Trump administration. Kristi Noem, Secretary of Homeland Security, she's lying. She lied on April 11th when she said, if you come without a real ID, you won't be able to travel. That's what she said on April 11th. The deadline was May 7th. On May 6th, she stood before Congress and they said, so people without real ID won't be able to fly. And she said, oh, no, 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 no. If they come with the regular ID, there'll just be a few more security steps and then we'll make sure that they meet their travel itinerary. That's what she said. And then the very next day on the so-called deadline, she put on Instagram that said today in all caps, if you do not come with your real ID, you will not be able to fly. So she said one thing to Congress on May 6th, and she said another thing to the world on May 7th. So she is pushing everybody into this violation of constitutional rights, this national federal identification system that could be hooked up with a global ID system, could become a vax passport, could become a national patient ID, linking all of your medical records together, could become so many things.
All right, now I'm going to ask you for conjecture. The question is, do you believe that Kristi Noem is part of a larger effort to actually continue to deceive the American people for tracking and surveillance?
I don't know that question. What her intentions or mindset is, I have no idea. But the fact of the matter is, if you were a real conservative, you would not be working to get people into an unconstitutional national identification system that when you are out of your position and when Trump is out of office and when someone like Gavin Newsom comes in, a system that he would use to keep you in his 15-minute cities, a system that he would use to make sure that you paid taxes for all your carbon use. Now we can see how far you travel and where you go, and we can see all the miles. We can just categorize them because we've got it all digital now. If you were a real conservative, you wouldn't do that.
So we may not actually know the answer, but there's enough other evidence through these years that we can make some pretty accurate conjecture. And I'm in agreement with you. We may be somewhat protected while President Trump is in office, but what about the future? With that in mind, is your organization, because you're specific for health freedom, is your organization helping people fight against this real ID and the claims that they are making of what we can and cannot do so that we can fight back and maintain our freedoms? Because as you said, this is unconstitutional. It violates our rights as American citizens. There's got to be some pushback that we can do.
Yeah, I think it was Brett Weinstein who called it the possibility that we'd be going to some sort of totalitarian system, because that's what it sets up. That's what's happening with it in China. Why would we do it in the United States? So our organization is leading the charge. I realize we're a health freedom organization, but we also know that this will lead to no card, no care. We know that it will be the vax passport. We believe it will be connected globally and it will be used to share all sorts of information about each and every one of us. And we are also very concerned that the way that they would force everybody into a real ID is they would say, as the very next official purpose of the real ID would be access to medical care. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody has to fly, but everybody needs a doctor. And
Mm-hmm.
so yes, as a health policy organization, we are very involved. We are leading the charge across the country. We have all sorts of documents on our refuserealid.org web page. It's a very special page. Documents to help you say no, documents to help you turn in your real ID. All sorts of people in all sorts of states around the country are having success. Some of them are not, and they're letting us know. And so if your listeners are making those kind of efforts to switch back, do not wait for your renewal period. Do it right now.
Okay.
The DMVs have gone rogue before.
All right, let's talk about that because that was one of the things I also wanted to bring up. You were just ahead of me. It's wonderful. But there are options in many states where we can, if we've already accepted the real ID, we can go back to the Department of Motor Vehicles and ask for a standard state ID, correct?
Standard state ID or a standard state driver's license. So there are 45 states that do not require the real ID. Only 5 states do, and that's Texas, Wyoming, Georgia, Mississippi, and Florida. Did I list them all? Anyway, so those 5 states don't give you any option whatsoever. But there are other states that don't give you an option once you've made the switch. And we've been finding that out because of what people are telling us. And we're not sure if it is that the state doesn't allow it or the individual DMVs don't allow it. And you could maybe go to a different DMV and make a switch. We're not sure about that yet. We know that from somebody and several people in California. They called it easy peasy. They just went and made the switch. Somebody somewhere else, the DMV agent said, "Well, I don't want to be nosy, but why don't you want this card? Why do you want a state driver's license?" And she just kind of demurred, right? She just didn't give a lot of information, the person who was making the switch. So the agent said, "So is it that you don't want a federal ID?" So that was interesting, right? So the DMVs know that this is a federal ID. And so, it'll be up to your listeners, wherever they are, to figure out whether or not their state would say no. Minnesota, it's really easy. We fought it here for 2 years. And so everything is really easy here to make the switch because if, for example, in Minnesota, we have the law so strong that if Christine Ohm would say for healthcare access, you need a real ID, the real ID law in Minnesota that conforms to the federal ID, that law goes poof. It's gone. So the entire law is repealed the second that HHS would add something beyond commercial flight to that required uses. And that is one thing that we are encouraging legislators. There's like legislators in 10 different states already, and there's, I think, another 2 who are working on legislation to stop conforming or to shut down the real ID in their state or to put poison pills in it like that. Like if you add anything else, we're done. So yeah, I encourage people, don't wait because those DMV agents who went rogue, in those 9 years, remember I said there was basically 9 years between when the state said no and Obama shouted from the rooftops. We discovered that there were a whole bunch of states that even though there were laws against it in their state, they were taking federal money and moving the state into real ID compliance behind the backs of their governors, behind the backs of their legislators. So if you have 3 years until you need to re-up, don't wait. Get it now. There are 44% of all driver's licenses and IDs that are not real ID compliant. And Homeland Security and TSA are desperate to get that number down. And we are determined to get that number up. We want it to be not just 44% non-compliant, we want it to be 46, 48, 50, 52. We want to change the trajectory, and we need the American people to work with us to make this happen. So go to refuserealid.org, and there's even one page, it's red on the top, and it says, lose your real ID. Lose your real ID, and it gives you all the instructions. But usually it's just as simple as going in there and saying, I don't want this real ID anymore. I want a state driver's license. And it's usually that simple.
Twila, this has been a wealth of information, especially for all of us here in the United States. But you did make reference to how a lot of this is a parallel to what's happened in communist China, where there is serious tracking and surveillance of people there, so much so that they have a social credit score that can impact their bank accounts, their spending, their travel, and on it goes. We are on that kind of a trajectory here in the United States. And I'm supposing other nations of the world most definitely are on the same kind of a trajectory. With that in mind, they may not have the Constitution of the United States to protect them, but there's got to be other things that people around the world can do because more and more we are seeing global trends to try to take over people around the world and enslave us. What do you recommend on that big note?
Well, on that, there's got to be people just like there are in China, right? Just like there were in Hong Kong who protested everything. But I think protesting, trying to become part of your own government to start to turn it around, to figure out who are the contractors for these countries doing this. Because in America, there's a contractor called IDEMIA, and everybody should look up IDEMIA. IDEMIA sees you. They're the ones who are running the cameras at the TSA. They're the ones who are doing the TSA pre-check. They've got the cameras in every port, well, not every port, but lots of the big ports around this nation. And they're doing most of the driver's license cards for the states in the United States.
Are they global as well?
They are in France. So they're a French company. They used to be called Morphotrust, and they're now called IDEMIA, IDEMIA. Just look them up and see. You can see their videos about their cameras. They want to see you, from about 20 feet back. They want to use your face to already put a name to who you are. So they show all of this on their website, what their plans are, all the different countries that they're working with. So the whole thing is going up in this direction. And there are publications like Biometric Update. It's news. It's free. It's online, which tells you every day, the latest things with national ID cards and digital ID cards and the companies that are working on them and the countries they're being imposed in and all that sort of thing. But America stands as a beacon of light in this world of darkness in so many ways. And we are headed down into that world of darkness, which is why our organization is bound and determined to turn this around. Because I believe that Americans want to be in the world of light and freedom. And they just think that digital ID is convenient and they don't really realize anything about the real ID. So they've been duped in so many ways. And if they understand the chains that are coming around their hands and around their homes and around their country through a national and federal digital ID biometric controlled system that they can be tracked and they can be controlled from anywhere, they are not going to agree to this. So I want to just say thank you for having me on to talk about this.
All right, now, Twila, we've talked a lot about HIPAA, we've talked about Real ID, and that's very specific to the United States of America. Now, I know that as things go in the United States, there is something of a forerunner to the rest of the nations in the world. And I'm very concerned with what's been going on with the globalists, that there are many other nations in the world that are being subjected to the same kind of tracking and surveillance that we're finding ourselves experience here in the United States. So speaking to my listeners from around the globe, because this is a global podcast, what would you say to them that they need to know that this is not just isolated to the United States, but they could take action in their own respective countries?
Well, I think that there are always people in every country who are lovers of freedom. And actually, I think that they always look to the United States to try to get information and advice and ideas for what they can do, but they have to move in their own country. And so, to tell the story about how these digital systems can be used to control them, to see what happened in China. Are they looking? They have to share that. But they also should, try to get a position in government, like as a member of their ruling party, who can actually move to get them to extract them from these kind of programs on digital ID. They should also look at the companies and they should track these companies. Like, who are these companies? So in America, it is IDEMIA that is really the one who's doing this all for the government. And IDEMIA is spelled IDEMIA. And IDEMIA is who's running the cameras at TSA PreCheck, who's running the entire identification system at TSA PreCheck, as well as the TSA checkpoints. And they also have ports all around the country that they have cameras in. So they are perfecting their system to know you by your biometrics and to know who everybody is and to be watching. So I like to say, find out the companies that are doing these systems for the countries that they're in, and then start watching those companies. Start sharing with members of the political parties or the people who are in power about how this is impacting the country, impacting your freedom, impacting your privacy. See what they're doing. Don't just think that because you can't see anything around you that you're not being tracked, followed, and profiled, or that data isn't being collected on everything that you do because you have a digital ID. Don't think of this as a convenience. Understand that this is a method of control no matter what country you're in. It's not about convenience. This is about control. So you have to, think differently about it.
Absolutely. Twyla, we've just had an initial conversation of both HIPAA and the Real ID and how both of these really violate person's God-given rights, and that is international. Our rights from God are international, and I definitely want to have you back, especially as we're finding legislation and different things taking place that can help reverse this. I want to get some updates from you, so please make a point of putting me on your short list that I can have you back soon.
Oh, absolutely. We'd love to come back. Thank you so much.
So, part of what I didn't like learning is that the Real ID Act passed without a hearing or a vote and was actually tagged onto a defense spending bill. This is evidence of tyrannical management of we the people. I also don't like that this is actually a method for the federal government to take charge over our state department motor vehicles, which usurps our state representation of us as citizens. The way this all came down means our legislators, who are supposed to represent us, gave up and allowed efforts that are entirely unconstitutional and that also promote globalism to prevail. The Real ID cards are said to have enhanced security aspects that make counterfeiting the ID more difficult. But more, the Real ID card contains compliance that helps pave the way for secure mobile identifications on smartphones. Claims are that this system will not create a federal database and that each state maintains their own records. So why are the feds involved in this ID process at all? There are just too many unsupported issues for me. Patrick G. Eddington, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, wrote the premise for requiring the Real ID is the assumption that all of us are terrorists first and a citizen of the Republic a very distant second. Who do we have to thank for this terrible idea? The 9/11 Commission. In fact, it was one of its core recommendations. As the Commission noted in its final July 2004 report, quote, all but one of the 9/11 hijackers acquired some form of U.S. identification document, some by fraud. Acquisition of these forms of identification would have assisted them in boarding commercial flights, renting cars, and other necessary activities. In response, the Commission recommended that the federal government, quote, should set standards for the issuance of birth certificates and sources of identification such as driver's licenses, end quote. But the 9/11 report continued, quote, fraud in identification documents is no longer just a problem of theft. At many entry points to vulnerable facilities, including gates for boarding aircraft, sources of identification are the last opportunity to ensure that people are who they say they are, and to check whether they are terrorists, end quote. Eddington responds, quote, the entire notion that an identification card is the last opportunity to rule out terrorists is refuted by the fact that the most effective last-ditch protection against bad actors among the public boarding an aircraft is physical screening of the passengers themselves and their luggage, end quote. And of course, this physical screening of passengers and their luggage to discover if any weapons are attempted to be brought on board aircraft sets the population up to be even more accepting of personal biometric data collection under the guise of safety. But getting back to a point Eddington made that I really liked, he wrote, quote, "I'm not aware of a single post-9/11 incident in which an actual terrorist, such as the so-called shoe bomber or the underwear bomber, boarded an aircraft with a fake ID. Yet those two made it aboard aircraft with explosive or incendiary devices that could have brought down the planes they were on and killed all aboard. TSA's struggle with passenger screening technologies and procedures is well known and represents a far bigger safety issue than determining who is boarding a given aircraft by their ID card. The REAL ID Act effectively institutes a form of mass surveillance and verification that doesn't discriminate between those who have a given reason for suspicion and those who do not. The REAL ID Act also raises several constitutional issues that have never been adjudicated. The Supreme Court has consistently ruled that the federal government can't directly prohibit interstate travel, but by making it increasingly difficult to travel without REAL ID, the government accomplishes a similar result indirectly. The question becomes whether the security benefits of REAL ID justify the burden placed on particular modes of travel. The record to date clearly shows they do not. Eddington concludes his article stating, "Finally, it implicates the principle of proportionality in constitutional law, whether the restriction on rights is proportional to the government interest being served. The differential treatment of air and rail travel exposes the hypocrisy and the inconsistency in how the government assesses security risks and the appropriate responses to those risks. The government has no business knowing who I am or why I am traveling domestically on an airliner unless I'm wanted for a crime or have given reason to suspect my intentions by having weapons on my person or in my luggage during screening. REAL ID obliterates the idea of freedom of travel, which is why it should be abolished." End quote. So, with just this much so far, we have ample good reason to get rid of the REAL ID Act. And I'm not sure if Twila made it clear enough, but you have options. Even though Tulsi Gabbard and others are making the public believe the REAL ID is required, all U.S. states allow you to choose not to upgrade to a REAL ID compliant license, effectively allowing you to keep a standard ID by simply not applying for the REAL ID compliant version when you renew. While the REAL ID Act sets federal standards, states are not mandated to require all residents to have a REAL ID. They continue to offer standard, non-compliant IDs for residents who prefer them or who do not need them for federal purposes. 5 states previously resisted the REAL ID mandate, but now issue federally accepted enhanced driver's licenses, EDL, as an alternative. These EDLs serve the same function as a REAL ID for domestic air travel and other federal purposes, but are not required for residents. The states included Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Vermont, and Washington. And if you're a resident of any of these 5 states, I suggest you look into what these EDLs actually entail before you accept it. States that don't have an EDL are still offering their standard state driver's license. If you have already secured a REAL ID and you want to return to your DMV and apply for a standard state license, you can. It will mean filling out the necessary application and paying any required fees, but you will be removing yourself from the unconstitutional restrictions and making a statement to our federal and state governments at the same time. Now, with a standard driver's license, you will need to show a valid United States passport to enter a federal building or for domestic air travel. This is what I and my husband have opted to do. While nationwide enforcement propaganda for federal purposes began in May 2025, several states and civil liberties organizations continue to oppose the law on the grounds that it creates a de facto national ID and is an invasion of privacy. Here are some actions you can take. First, opt for an alternative ID where possible. In some states, you can obtain a drive-only license, which is not a REAL ID compliant driver's license, and it's solely for the purpose of driving. Using a non-compliant ID for state functions and a passport for federal purposes like air travel can help resist the normalization of real ID as a national ID. For air travel and accessing federal facilities, you can use a United States passport or another TSA-approved ID instead of a real ID-compliant state license. This can help push back on the idea that real ID is the only form of identification. You can contact your state legislators to voice your opposition and encourage them to propose or support measures that roll back state-level real ID compliance. You can contact federal representatives, contacting your United States senators and congressional representatives and asking them to repeal or reform the Real ID Act. You can argue that it infringes on privacy rights and that other secure identification methods already exist. You can sign petitions, participate in online petitions, such as those hosted on platforms like Action Network calling for the repeal of the Real ID Act. You can support advocacy organizations. You can donate or volunteer with organizations that have historically and continue to oppose the Real ID Act. Opposition has drawn support from groups spanning the political spectrum, including civil liberties groups, libertarians, immigration advocates, and state-level organizations. They use strategic litigation and advocacy to challenge government surveillance and national ID systems. Using an internet search, I found a long list of different organizations, including the American Center for Law and Justice. You can help raise public awareness, spread information about the privacy and surveillance concerns associated with the Real ID Act, and challenge its purpose as a national ID. Use social media, community meetings, and online forums to inform others. My faithful listeners know the advancement of evil we have been subjected to is multi-pronged and by design has been launched on all possible fronts. As God explained in his prophetic word through Julie Green, which she posted on October 6th, we are in a war with countless battles occurring simultaneously. It is the intention of the enemy to have us scattered, distracted, and ineffective by the sheer magnitude of assaults. Through Julie, God said, quote, "You may be asking, Lord, what do we do? Our enemies are targeting every part of our lives. They are targeting our nations, our freedoms, our children, our health, our minds, our finances, our well-being. What can we possibly do about this? What kind of choice do we have if our enemies have this type of hold already in place and have designed all these things against us? How do we fight them back?" My children, God says, you war, you worship and resist, while the wicked are restricted. End quote. God says you war, worship, and resist. W-A-R. While the wicked are restricted. As we war, the wicked are restricted. No matter what the battlefront, the victory is assured by the same tactic in every situation: worship and resist. We worship God for who he is and what he has promised and what he has already done. God has revealed our enemies are petrified of born-again Christians. The enemy knows the power we have over him and his schemes when we wield the authority and the power we have in Jesus Christ. God knows we have not been properly taught how to wield his power, but he is now, by the Holy Spirit, raising us up to speak, decree, and declare our victory in Christ. Next week, I plan on readdressing our world economy and financial concerns in light of the United States government being shut down, and all that entails, not just for Americans, but for the world. If you need a good shot of hope and encouragement, plan on joining me next week for more Faith to Live By. Now, I ask you to please listen to my closing announcements and to take advantage of the many goods and services I bring you in an effort to at least cover the costs of this podcast. The first announcement clarifies more about the changes to our Greece tour scheduled for April 2026. If you haven't yet signed up to join us, please listen carefully and follow the instructions because I really want all of us to be able to meet up in Greece. It may seem far off, but most people make plans for a significant vacation about a year in advance. So if you haven't already expressed interest in traveling with us in April 2026, Now is the time to do so. We want to have about 30 people total because this size group works best for the specific tour I have in mind. We'll be walking the footsteps of the Apostle Paul. I'm using the time between now and October 2025 to determine if we have enough interest, and the trend indicates we definitely should. We have just about 30 people on the list now, but I'd like to have more because when it comes to the actual day of making a commitment, things could have changed, and I want to be able to have at least 30 actually attend the tour. So, if you think you'd like to be part of the Faith to Live By Christian tour with me in Greece during April 2026, now's the time to get your name and number in your party on the list. There's no obligation at this point, you're just expressing your interest. Attendees need to arrange their own air travel to and from the Athens International Airport. To get your name on the list, send an email to faithtoliveby@PamelaChristianMinistries.com with the word Greece in the subject line. In the body of the email, provide your name, contact information, and number of people you expect to be in your party. This will place your name on the interested in attending list, but does not obligate you in any way. It merely assures you have first right of refusal when down payments are due. If you didn't get the details written down that I just shared, simply visit my Beyond the Podcast page using the link in the show notes. If you like what you hear from me with this podcast, I highly recommend my book series, my award-winning blog, and consider signing up for my certificate course in apologetics. My aim with that course is to help people learn how not only to use apologetics to share truth with others, but to help Christian leaders incorporate apologetics into their respective ministries so more Christians are learning how to share their faith. You can learn more by using the link in the show notes. For now, I offer my weekly podcasts, my blog, and bi-monthly e-newsletter at no cost. And certainly I have hard costs associated with doing all I do. If you've been blessed by my work and would like to help my work reach others, why not consider partnering with me? For as little as $10 a month, you can become a partner. Then together we can reach even more people for Jesus. Simply visit my Pamela Christian Ministries homepage and then click on the Give button at the top menu bar. Or if you prefer, you can go directly to the Give page using the link in the show notes. To become a partner, you can use my PayPal or Venmo account, but you will also see other ways you can support my work on that page. Whether you choose to become a monthly partner, give a one-time donation, purchase my books and products from my web store, or support my affiliate sponsors, anything you can do to help me continue this work would be greatly appreciated. And as always, your prayers and telling others about me and my ministry work is much needed. When it comes to my selection of affiliate sponsors, I first look for Christian-owned and operated businesses, and I make a point of personally using the products or services so I can fully endorse them. I seek sponsors that offer products or services you can get via the internet worldwide, and I specifically consider what is common to most people universally. So you'll find health, beauty, and wellness products through Dr. Zelenko's Z-Stack supplements and from QE Strong. Dr. Zelenko's Z-Stack supplements are truly amazing and are available to my listeners for a 5% discount per purchase or a 10% discount for a monthly subscription using the promo code FTLB. You may have heard my interview with Rob Renee about QE Strong. Discover the benefits of quantum energy to overcome all sorts of ailments. Visit QEstrong.com and use the promo code FTLB at checkout to receive your discount. Then my newest affiliate I'm really excited to bring you is Q Streaming. That's CUE Streaming Television. People with United States addresses can get over 3,000 channels, including live TV with streaming television without a contract. Get all of your local networks and favorite movie and sports and pay-per-view channels for about half of what cable costs. See the video promo link in the show notes to learn more. Affiliate sponsors only provide financial support to me when you purchase what they offer. So before you support Amazon or any other retailer, if I offer what you're looking for, please purchase through me. When it comes to special occasions, birthdays, or Christmas gifts, consider my books, jewelry, CDs, and more from my web store or any of the affiliate goods and services I offer. When you purchase from my web store, be sure to use the promo code TRUTH, TRUTH, to receive a 20% discount. Again, you'll find all the links in the show notes. If you like the content and resource material I bring you with this podcast, you'll find much more by connecting with me through my blog. In fact, my blog has been awarded 2 unsolicited awards for Christian content. And I'm also very active on social media. I can cover much more on social media than I can with this weekly podcast. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to my complimentary bi-monthly e-newsletter. I offer encouragement, special offers, and one of my signature recipes with each and every edition. Yep, I'm a foodie and I love to entertain, which is why Faith, Family, Friends, and Food is a bonus segment of my bi-monthly e-newsletter. To receive even more, please be sure to check out my dedicated podcast listeners page, Beyond the Podcast. Here's where we can connect exclusively and you can download complimentary devotionals, resources, and more. On that page, I also ask you to help me learn more about you and what you want by completing the form visible once you scroll down that page. And something that is very easy for you to do and would mean a lot to me is for you to rate, subscribe, or comment on this podcast according to what your preferred listening platform allows. You know how it works. The more likes and subscriptions to this podcast, the more opportunity we have to expand the listening audience. And that means we can reach more people with the gospel message of Jesus while helping people learn how to better apply their Christian faith. I hope you'll join me next week and tell your friends and family to listen right here on Faith to Live By, where we learn how to gain spiritual victory over life's issues. Until next week, I'm Pam Christian, asking you to remember Christ died for us. The least we can do is live for Him.